Hello, everyone. I'll be talking about qualitative research methods. And it's actually chapter 8 of the book Practical Research, Planning and Design. It's by Paul Liddy and Dr. Omrad. If you look at those different videos that I let you watch, all of those are actually part of the quantitative research designs. I mentioned that there are three major research designs: the quantitative research design, the qualitative research design, and then the mixed research design. So for this video, I'll be talking about qualitative research methods. For a moment, slideshow. So potential advantages of qualitative research, or what are those advantages of qualitative research designs over the quantitative research designs? Number one is all about exploration. If you can recall those videos about quantitative research design, I emphasize that in terms of quantitative, we look at into explanation of those different phenomena as observed by the researchers. And in terms of qualitative research design, we look at into exploration of the different phenomena as observed by the researchers. It's actually a multifaceted description. Verification is also part, theory development, problem identification, and then we go into evaluation. Research problems. Qualitative studies do not allow the researcher to identify cause and effect relationships. So take note, qualitative research design or qualitative studies do not allow the researcher to identify cause and effect relationships. So take note about that, in which the cause and effect relationship is actually part of the quantitative research design. May be general and open-ended. Unlike in quantitative research design that we have to be very specific on the problem. But in here, it's actually general and open-ended. And that's actually part of the exploration of the problems identified by qualitative researchers. So for example, what is the nature of? What is it like to? Blah, blah, blah. So we don't actually consider about the entire meaning of the acronym SMART, about specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented, and then we have time-bounded as the last one in there. Attainability is actually part, but looking on that acronym SMART, we only focus into the measurability. Dapat it should be measurable, attainable, and then realistic, and then time-bounded. But in terms of the specific statement of the problem, we don't consider that one in a qualitative design. That's only for a quantitative research design. Research methodology may not be determined in advance, may continue to evolve over the course of the study, requires considerable preparation and planning. So looking at the research design, you can actually make some adjustments, unlike in a quantitative that we actually have that one before the conduct of the study or before the conduct of the research process. Qualitative research designs. Now, what are those different common qualitative research designs? So number one, we look at into case study, ethnographic research design, phenomenological research design, grounded theory research design, narrative inquiry, and then content analysis. So these are some of the common qualitative research designs that the chapter is actually focusing. What is a case study? A particular individual, program, or event is studied in depth. So we look at into a particular individual or it might be a program, or it might be an event, and that is actually being studied in an in-depth perspective. So we look at into what had happened to the individual, what had happened to the program, what had happened to the event, or what is happening to the individual, what is happening to the program, or what is happening to the event. So most doctors are actually medical doctors in the hospital are actually using case study, wherein each patient is actually being studied in an in-depth perspective. In schools, guidance counselors, psychometricians, and even teachers can conduct a case study, wherein teachers, guidance counselors, or maybe psychologists could actually conduct an individual study, looking at the problem of a certain individual or a student or a learner, looking at some issues of a certain student, a certain learner, or a certain pupil. And that can be done by the classroom teachers, the guidance counselors of the school, or the psychologists of the school, or even school principals or administrators. Used for learning more about a little known or poorly understood situation. So a little is actually being known for a certain behavior or poorly understood situation about a certain individual or a program or event. So that could be investigating how an individual or program changes over time. So as we start a certain program or event, then over time there is a change. It might be a change for the better, or it might be some other changes, or the event that is actually having fluctuating changes or increasing changes. Generating or providing preliminary support for one more hypothesis. No? So if you look at into some formulations of hypotheses, you can actually look at into case study so that you will have a very objective or an educated hypothesis or an educated case. The limitation. Findings may not be generalizable to other situations because samples are actually very small in here or maybe just one, then we could not generalize that one to certain population. So most likely the results are actually true for that, but that will give a benchmark data for other kind of populations. Ethnography, in-depth investigation of an entire group that shares common culture. So we look at into a study that is about culture. So we look at that one as part of ethnographic research design. So site-based fieldwork performed in natural setting, performed over a long period of time, key informants, and then even involves participant observation. And one of the things that we look at into ethnographic research design, in math, you're very much aware of the two types of writing the numbers in Roman numerals and then in the Hindu-Arabic numeral. So this kind of numerals that we have for now, we use that one in chaptering or maybe in pagination. And the common numbers that we have, and those numbers are written in Roman numerals, in different literature, in different books, in different magazines. You can actually find those. And even in any places around us, you can find Roman numbers, Roman numerals, and the Hindu-Arabic. And why are they existing? Because of ethnographic research design. That early mathematicians did an ethnographic research design to have a delineation, a separation, or a classification of numbers as to Roman numeral and then the Hindu-Arabic numeral. There was one time when I was still in Mindanao, I was invited to be the statistician of a certain study funded by the Department of Science and Technology and UNICEF as well as World Bank. And that study was all about pregnancy beliefs, child rearing practices among Subanen women in Zamboanga del Norte. So pregnancy beliefs and child rearing practices among Subanen women in Zamboanga del Norte. So looking at that perspective, looking at the Subanen is actually part of the tribal group uh, in Zamboanga del Norte or even in Mindanao in general. So that could be part of the ethnographic research design. We look at into the practices of pregnant women and the child rearing practices. Now, for these women who are classified as Subani. And then we look at into specific patterns, we look at into certain practices, and then we develop that one. These are the practices among Subani. And that is an example of an ethnographic research design. In one of the studies also conducted by the Department of Pharmacy of Negros Oriental State University, they actually studied about the herbal medicine. I don't know exactly, but what I heard is that they studied about herbal medicine among indigenous people in Mabinay, in Mabinay. So that could be part of ethnographic research design. You have an in-depth investigation of an entire group that shares common culture or certain issue, certain perspective within that culture. So used to study, the ethnographic research design is used to study explicit cultural patterns, implicit beliefs and assumptions. So in the example, we have pregnancy beliefs among Sabanan women. Below the surface, taken for granted patterns that even group members are not always consciously aware of. So there are actually practices like we look at the child rearing practices among Sabanan women in which we do not know exactly on what's the pattern, what's the child rearing practices. So after that study, we're able to establish, these are the practices of the Sabanan women during pregnancy and in child rearing for their culture. Narrative inquiry, used for studying complex, multifaceted phenomena. So focuses on the recollections and stories of individuals who have experiences related to these phenomena. So central notion, three-dimensional narrative space comprised of interaction, continuity, and situation. So again, we look at into a central notion of three-dimensional narrative space comprised of interaction, continuity, and then situation. Now, we look at narrative inquiry, for example, or in some books, we call this one as the narrative research design. If you look at into Philippine history or the world history books that we have, so I assume that all of you are able to take up. We're able to take up history way back senior high school and even world history in senior high school. And if you look at books about history, Philippine history by Gregorio Saide, or world history by Gregorio Saide, or any other authors, you look at that there's actually a narrative design. The book of Rizal's life works and writings by Saide, for example. So there was a complete narration on the life of Dr. Jose Rizal. And from early childhood, then family background up to his martyrdom. So there was a complete narration of what had happened to the life of Dr. Jose Rizal. So that's a common example of narrative research design. Writing books in Philippine history, writing books in world history perspective, or even if you are going to look at into the history of Dumaguete, the history of Sibulan, Negros Oriental, or even the history of your barangay could be part of the narrative research design. But of course, when you have that data collection, it must be scientific. You are going to collect the data scientifically. Phenomenological study. So, study that attempts to understand people's perceptions and perspectives of a particular experience. So, when we talk about phenomenological study or research design, we look at into the experiences, the lived experiences of the participants or of the respondents of the study. So, looking at the experience, and we're going to make an analysis of the experiences of the respondents towards certain phenomena. So, for example, we look at into a case where in science, no, in science, we look at into a case that the vagina bleeds, the vagina bleeds during first sexual intercourse. That's a common phenomenon. No? The vagina bleeds during the first sexual intercourse. And why is it so? And what are the experiences during first sexual intercourse? And then looking into the perspective why the vagina bleeds. So during first sexual intercourse, the hymen is actually being broken, and that could be the cause of the bleeding. That could be the cause of the bleeding. And there's no experimentation conducted in there. So uh, the, the, the scientific community is able to know that there was bleeding because of the breakage of the hymen because of phenomenological study. That experiences are being what collected and then make an analysis of the experiences. Of course, it would be coupled with medical literature. And then we look at into a case where people are being interviewed, those who have undergone first sexual intercourse, on what had happened during the first sexual intercourse. Was there bleeding during your first sexual intercourse? Uh, then after that, make an analysis on those different things. So why? So why is it that books would say because of the breakage of the hymen, the the hymen, then that's the cause of the bleeding? Why there is pain during the first sexual intercourse? Because of the breakage of the hymen, and that causes bleeding. And that is part of the experience of the women during the first sexual intercourse. Looking into a perspective also where uh, when my uncle died, and then his religion was actually in another, not a Roman Catholic. And then when we went to his residence for a vigil after 9 o'clock, we were told, okay, you can go home now because they're going to sleep. So that's the experience that I had during that time. And that's very uncommon to us Roman Catholics because we will not sleep. No one will sleep if we're actually having some wake within the family, or somebody dies in the family, and it's actually just within the residence of the family. So we have to do vigil. And in that case, I was so surprised because they slept. No? They actually slept. They actually slept in there. And then, of course, there was light. And then, totally different from my experience as a Roman Catholic. So, we need to understand that kind of experience. And if that would be the focus of your study, we look at into phenomenological research design. Then grounded theory study. Goal is to collect and interpret data to develop a theory. You collect data, you present the data, you make an analysis of the data, then interpret the data, and then develop a theory. That's the purpose, to develop a theory. In some cases, we use a theory and then verify the theory on whether it is true or actually false. But in a grounded theory, we actually collect, we analyze, we present, we analyze, we interpret, and then develop a theory. So that's the focus of grounded theory. I just would like to focus on what's the difference between a law and a theory. A law is always true. So if you look at into the law of demand and supply, it is always true at all the time. We could not find a counter example for that. But if you look at the theory, in some cases it is true, and in some cases it is false. It's not true all the time. It's not false all the time. So there might be some cases that that theory is true. There might be some cases that that theory is actually false. That is why when we do research, some of the foci are actually into verifying, testing whether the theory is true or false in a certain population or in a certain sample or in a certain setting. Data analysis begins right away. Data are organized into categories until saturation. And when we say saturation, you collect data and then still you collect data and then still you collect data, then still you collect data. And then you are going to ask yourself, when should I stop collecting the data? Stop collecting the data when you reach data saturation. And what is meant by data saturation? When you collect the data, then you collect another data, and then you collect another data, and you notice that the data are just repeated. The kind of data is being repeated, then the kind of data is being repeated. Meaning you get the same kind of data, you get the same kind of information. Even if you're going to increase your sample, from 10 samples, you increase that one to 15 samples, you increase that one to 20 samples, you increase that one to 25 samples, but you notice that after the 10th sample or after the 15th sample, you notice that the data are actually just the same to what you have collected in the first 10 samples. You increase that one to 20 to 25, yet you notice that the data that you have collected are actually the same to the samples, the first 10 samples or the first 10 samples. And if you do that one again and again, you notice that the same kind of data are being taken, then that means that you reach data saturation. And when you reach data saturation, that will give you a signal, that will give you a clue that you are going to stop collecting the data. Why? Because even if you're going to have 50 samples, if you're going to increase that one to 55, you still get the same kind of data. So it is just a waste of money, time, and effort, but you will still get the same kind of data. Why? Because this is what we call data saturation, and that's natural. It's a natural event among respondents or among people. Theory emerges from interrelations among categories. So you look at variables, these are the data for this variable, these are the data for this variable, these are the data for this variable, and make an analysis onto the interrelationships of the data between and among variables, and even between and among categories. Typically focus on a process, no? Eating, class discussion, stress during our work. No? So it would depend on the process or the focus of your grounded theory. Content analysis. So content analysis involves detailed systematic examination of the contents of a body of material. It might be about the contents of the book, the contents of newspapers, the contents of legal documents, the contents of transcripts of conversation, contents of blogs. So often included with another study design. You can mix that one with another study design or research design. Often has quantitative component, no? Identify categories and count frequency in each. No? So for example, there was one who mentions about subject-verb agreement in all of your answers, no, in my YouTube account, no, wherein I let you reflect, I let you summarize, and then I let you react to those different comments, or no, to those different videos that I let you watch. So when you look at into that kind of perspective, you look at the content of the summary, and then check on the subject verb agreement. So that's the component that you are going to look into that. Or it might be on the meat, no, or the content of the summary, the meat or the content of the reflection or the reaction, looking into that kind of perspective. And then going to that example about subject verb agreement, Then you're going to make a frequency, count the frequency. You're going to count how many have correct subject verb agreement, how many have errors in the subject verb agreement. So that's part of the content analysis. And then you're going to ask, what's the reason of having errors in the subject verb agreement? And you're going to have also an intervention that based on the errors that you see on the content and what possible intervention can you offer. But if you're going to recall my video on experimental and exposed factor research design, when you're going to make an intervention, the intervention could not just be done in one setting, but it can be on repeated measures. So go back to the video on experimental research design and the ex post facto research design. You can look at that term, no? Repeated measures. So the number of repetitions of the treatment is a factor in determining on whether the effect is actually part of that course in an experiment, or for you to look at a very good set of data, you look at into repetitions of the data collection. Multiple methods are used, no? Collecting qualitative data. Number one, multiple methods are used. You can use interview plus observation plus artifacts. So it would be a combination. And if you're going to combine many methods, then the better is the better is the result. You're able to come up with data from different sources. That is why when when I mentioned about statistical treatment, you are going to mention also the sources of the data and even the methods of collecting the data. So many qualitative researchers engage in the production of memos. Data collection follows an emerging design. Analysis of early data influences additional data collection. Researchers write memos during data collection. All data must be collected in an ethical way, even in quantitative. You are going to have informed consent. In qualitative, informed consent, and then in mixed research design, you have to make use of informed consent also. Then right to privacy must be addressed. Then the low risk. So especially for now in the Philippines that we have a republic on data privacy. So always have an informed consent. Credibility and transferability. So these two terms are equivalent to validity and reliability in quantitative research design. No? So I repeated that one in a quantitative research designs, that there must be validity and there must be reliability of the research instrument. And even looking into the research instrument, you need to have it valid and you need to have it reliable. And there are actually many things to use in the computation of the validity and reliability of the research instrument. So in here, we look at into credibility and transferability. Whereas quantitative researcher judge assessment strategies as reliable. Qualitative researchers prefer to speak on dependability. So in terms of quantity, so we look at into the reliability. In terms of qualitative researchers, we speak into dependability. Strategies. So, for a moment. Strategies to enhance credibility and reliability. So identifying the biases, reflexivity, identify those. Collecting multiple forms of data, we call that one as triangulation. And take note, when we say triangulation, it does not mean that there are three sources because of the word triangulation. But if you collect data from multiple forms of data to forms, three forms, four forms, that is part of triangulation. Triangulation. Separating observations, data from interpretation memos. So take note, no? Observations are different, interpretations are also different. Seeking exceptions and contradictory evidence. So in all cases, there are what we call exception to the rule. So dapat you are going to include that one. No? What are the exceptions and what are contradictory evidence? Spending considerable time on site, member checking and audit trails. So all of these things could actually enhance credibility and reliability. Selecting an appropriate sample depends on your research question and goal. So random samples best for generalizing to a larger population. Purposive samples best when specific information perspective is needed. Grounded theories tend to engage in theoretical sampling and discriminant sampling. In my earlier videos, I talk about theoretical sampling and then discriminant sampling. So I want you to go over that video on theoretical sampling and the discriminant sampling designs. Selecting appropriate sample still. Case study researchers may engage in extreme case sampling. A researcher selects individuals who have a unique or deviant characteristics within a case, then focuses observations on those individuals. So, extreme case sampling. Why are you going to look at into extreme case? Because you could not find kind of data in the literature of the extreme case sampling. Look at into those deviant characteristics beyond the normal. And if that would be the case, we look at into extreme case sampling. We look at into extremely high or extremely low as part of that deviant characteristics. We look at into things that's very uncommon, not part of the normal setting. When researchers have little control over certain situations, they may employ convenience sampling and then snowball sampling design. Convenience sampling, I mentioned that one in my other video. Snowball sampling, I mentioned that one also in my other video. Ideally, the sample should provide information not only about how things are on average, but also about how much variability exists in the phenomenon under investigation. Remember when I talk about measures of central tendency and skew distributions, I presented two videos in there. Measures of central tendency video number 1, measures of central tendency video number 2. So in there, we look at into the computation of average and the computation of variation. And I emphasize that they are actually coupled, that the pair of the average, the mean, or the arithmetic mean, or the weighted mean is the variability. And commonly we use the standard deviation. If there's mean, then the pair must be standard deviation. The mean looks at the central location. The standard deviation looks at the variability or the spreading of the data about the mean. You know, whether the data are homogeneous or the data are heterogeneous. So it's being here. No? Should provide information not only about how things are on average, but also about how much variability exists in the phenomenon under investigation. So observations, typically unstructured, free-flowing. That's the nature of conducting an observation. Can be very time-consuming. Yeah, that's true. Can be biased. Researchers' attention, researchers' interpretation, researchers' influence on participants. But when you are going to do the observation, follow the guides because in each observation, there are guidelines to be followed. And detach yourself. What you see is what you are going to write, no additionals. But if in case what you observe is actually in doubt, then ask another observer on whether what's the reality of what you have observed. Interviews. Identify general questions and follow-up questions in advance. consider participants' cultural backgrounds. Yeah, because there are some protocols to be followed if we address culture. For example, if you go to Muslim culture, you go to Subanan culture, and those indigenous people in Medina and other locations, no? Because each culture has some rules to be followed. Like when I was in India, way back 2014, I was sent by the Philippine government and Negros Oriental State University together with the TESDA to attend the International Training on Labor Research. So I was in India from February 3, 2014 to February 21, 2014. So I studied advanced labor research there at the International Labor Institute of Noida, India, at New Delhi. So one of the things that I learned, because I was with Indian people, with Indian classmates, and with Indian professors, and of course, there were 31 different nationalities who attended the training. And then I learned different cultures in there. And one of the things was all about the culture of the Indian. That shaking of hands among women is a no, no, no. Shaking of hands among women, Indian women, is a no, no, no. We could not do that. But here in the Philippines, you can do the shaking to both men and women. So when you conduct an interview, see to it nga you have background knowledge on the cultural background of the one that you are going to interview to avoid trouble. Make sure sample includes people who can give the information you want. That's the best thing that you are going to consider, because there might be some cases that you're actually talking with people whom you could not get data, whom you could not get information. So then find a suitable location. Of course, during interviews, the location would matter. So have a place where it's convenient to both you conducting the interview and the one that you are actually interviewing. Much as possible, do not actually look at your comfort zone, but look at also the perspective of the one that you are going to interview. And most of the time, we look at into the the location that is suitable and comfortable with the one that we are going to interview. Get the written permission. That's standard operating procedure. Now, in all types of data collection, you have to have written permission. Then establish and maintain rapport. Because if you are not able to establish and maintain rapport, you could not actually have a very good interview results. You could not actually get informations, collect informations with whom you are actually interviewing. Focus on the actual rather than on the abstract or hypothetical. So be objective, be specific, use concrete words, if possible, use a language in which that is commonly used by the one that you are interviewing, or the one that you are interviewing is actually adept or expert on that language. If Cebuano is actually the most adept one, then make use of Cebuano. The only thing in there is you're going to translate your interview guide into a Cebuano version. Don't put words in people's mouth, no? So you know that. And all the time, let just collect the data, do not debate, do not argue, but always just record the data that they've collected from the interviews. But of course, you can do some follow-ups. So why? You can have some follow-ups on the first question, on the second question, but never argue, never debate. 9, record responses verbatimly. No? So dapat record responses verbatimly. That's why in an interview, you are going to record. No? You are going to record. And you are going to ask the permission that you are going to record the interview. Because you could not jot down notes completely while you are also talking, while you are interviewing the person. Or if not, you are going to have somebody jotting down all the things that are being considered in the interview. But the most ideal one is recording the interview. And you are going to listen again that recorded the interview and then start writing the transcript. No? We call that one as the transcript. Keep your reactions to yourself. No, keep your reactions to yourself. Be polite. If something is funny, then try to reflect first on whether it is appropriate to laugh. Remember that you may not be getting the facts. So take note of that. When conducting a focus group, take group dynamics into account. In some cases, the interview is not individual. You can have it by group, and we call that one as focus group discussion. Criteria for evaluating qualitative research. Number one, purposefulness. The research question drives the methods used to collect and analyze the data. It is the kind of research question that will identify that it is quantitative, it is qualitative, or a mixed research design. Explicitness of assumptions and biases. The researcher identifies and communicates anything that may influence the data collection and interpretation. Then the rigor. The researcher uses rigorous, precise, and thorough methods and takes steps to remain as objective as possible. So, in all cases, whether it is in the quantitative design, the qualitative design, or the mixed research design, the word objective as much as possible is always our guiding point. Open-mindedness. The researcher shows a willingness to modify the hypothesis and interpretation when necessary. So, number five, completeness. The researcher develops an in-depth, multifaceted picture of the phenomenon. So, you're going to have a thick description about the phenomenon. Coherence. The researcher uses converging data to develop portrait that hangs together. So, you know what is coherence in our English language courses. But here in research, we're going to converge the data. We are going to collect the data, present the data, analyze the data, interpret the data scientifically so that you're able to have a better analysis, interpretation of the data that you have actually collected. Seven, persuasiveness. The researcher presents logical arguments and the weight of the evidence that supports them. So it's a matter of persuading, but you could not persuade someone if you don't have the evidence that would support the claim that you have in your study. Number eight, consensus. Other individuals agree with the researcher's interpretations and explanations. That's what we are going to consider. Consensus. Usefulness. The project leads to a better understanding of the phenomenon, more accurate predictions about future events, interventions that enhance the quality of life. So, understanding of the phenomenon could be an example that after completing the study, there would be better understanding about the phenomenon. Before the research, the phenomenon is not well understood. There's confusion about the phenomenon. But after the study, after the research process, then there's a better understanding of the phenomenon. More accurate predictions about future events. Yeah. Before the conduct of the study, then you see that there are actually some predictions are not accurate. That's the reason why you are going to undergo that kind of qualitative research study. And then after that qualitative study, you're able to have a more accurate predictions about future events based on your completed study. Interventions that enhance the quality of life. So after after having the study, you're able to provide an intervention. What kind of intervention can you have? So if you look at my quantitative research design coupled with qualitative research design about the difficulties encountered, blah, 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 conducted in Sikihor. So there's an intervention being provided that would enhance the quality of life of math teachers in Sikihor. I think grade 11 math teachers in Sikihor. So that's one thing that you are going to consider, usefulness of the qualitative research. Take note, better understanding of the phenomenon, then more accurate predictions about future events, then interventions that enhance the quality of life. And all of these three can be contextualized depending on your research topic or research problem. So all the things that I mentioned in here are copyrighted by Person Education way back 2019, 2016, and then 2013. So kindly cite the author of the book should you like to use any terms, any ideas from this chapter. So thank you very much.